welcome to another episode of The World Today, where we bring you the latest updates from around the world. I'm Rehan Morsi, and I'm joined this afternoon by Mr. Abdellatif. Wahba. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
We start with our first news item from the Daily News of Egypt that reads, Sisi receives a delegation from American Jewish Committee. The news item itself reads, President Abdel Fattah Sisi received a delegation from the American Jewish Committee at the presidency headquarters in Al-Ittihadiyya Palace. The president and the delegation discussed Egypt's vital role in the Middle East region. They also discussed Egypt's vision regarding peace efforts and the Palestinian issue. The delegation also met with the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, tackling boosting the Egyptian-U.S. ties as well as the Palestinian issue. How do you see the significance of the presidency receiving the U.S. Jewish delegation?
As you know, we are accustomed on such visits for the Jewish American Committee to Egypt, especially in the transforming the new administrations of the American administrations and also new president and so on.
Yes.
So it is important and a great chance for president and the Egyptian administrations to clarify and illustrate all the bilateral issues, especially as you know that this committee has a strong relations with the with any American administrations, and at the same time, as you know, they can play an important role, especially in the Middle East peace process with the Palestinians. So I think it is a chance also for the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs to give them the Egyptian point of view for a final solutions and final peace talks between the Palestinian and the Israeli government.
But there's a bit of an obstacle for the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, especially since the president-elect Donald Trump has stated he wants to move the embassy from Jerusalem.
The American embassy.
And the ambassador they're sending is a hardline, a Jewish supporter of the Jewish state.
As you know that this is not only the main missions of the new American president, Donald Trump, but also I think he in the last 2 days he picked the chief of Exxon as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also he declared some pledges for the Israeli to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I think this is maybe some propaganda to suffocate the oppositions in the American society.
It's provocative
themselves.
For the Palestinians.
Yeah, this of course. And as you know, many previous administrations declared and put this as a pledge in their elections programs, but they failed to move it. Especially, it will be from one side. But as you know, that the United Nations, the European communities, at the same time, opposed to move any of their embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
How do you see the Egyptian-Israeli relations today?
As you know that although there is no official visits between Egypt and Israel, I think it is the only visit for Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry that happened many months ago. But I think there is cooperations, and also especially as you know that the Egyptian historic rule is to reach to a final solutions for between the Palestinian and the Israelis, and at the time Egypt is the honest peace broker in the Middle East. And as you know that the four countries tried before to play an important role. I mean the United States,
yes.
Britain, France, and so on, and Russia. They failed to reach to an agreement between the Palestinian and the Israeli. But they, from time to time, they rely on Egypt as we can be as the honest peace brokers between the two sides.
Okay, let's move to the next item that we have from Egypt Independent that reads, Egypt condemns the Burkina Faso terror attack. The news item itself reads, Foreign Minister condemned in a statement issued today the terrorist attack that targeted an army unit in the city of Nassombo in Burkina Faso. The attack killed 12 soldiers. Spokesman for the Foreign Ministry expressed sincere condolences to the families of the victims, calling on God Almighty to inspire them patience and fortitude. The statement stressed Egyptian government and people solidarity with the government and people of Burkina Faso in the face of terrorism. Terrorism is obviously a #1 subject, not just for Egypt, but for the entire world. Do you think that the African Union, especially since this is an African issue right now, will somehow have some sort of special sessions dedicated to combating terrorism?
Yeah, of course, as you know, that Egypt before presented many initiatives for the African countries to cooperate and to help in facing or combating terrorism in any place, as you know. And at the same, many African countries before thought that the Arab countries and the African, the North African countries are the African countries that suffered from terrorism. But as you know, that terrorism now extended not only in Europe, not only in Asia, but also in the African countries. So it is important for the African Union and for the African countries to adopt a new policy for exchanging the knowledge, the information between the African countries. This is, of course, to face terrorism. As you know, that now terrorism has no land,
yes,
has
exactly.
no religions. So it is the rule of all the African countries as well as the European countries and so on to cooperate in facing and combating terrorism.
The thing is with terrorism, obviously traditional ways of combating fighting, which is through the army and whatever, like for instance in Syria and Iraq, is not necessarily the best way to combat guerrilla-style warfare. Do you think that there should be special task forces designed somehow to combat terrorism like they're only...
Yeah, of course. It is important just now to create a body, an entity to face terrorism, not to depend upon the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations or the participations of some countries and refusing the others. But I think the United Nations and the European country or European Union and so on, and the African countries at the same time must adopt a new policy to create a new body in world to face terrorism. Before, as you know, that the United Nations peacekeeping forces is participating in some tasks. This is, of course, to make separations between the two rivals, for example, or between two countries. But now the terrorism, as I told, has no religion, has no place. So it is important for the world to face terrorism in cooperation with all the countries, with the international organization like the United Nations and the Security Council at the same time, and the Arab League.
Yes. Let's move to the next item that we have from the World Bulletin that reads, Tunisia Prime Minister calls emergency meeting on alleged Mossad involvement in Zaoury murder. The news item itself reads, Tunisian Prime Minister Youssef Chahid called on an emergency cabinet meeting following the release of a statement from Hamas military wing Azzeddin al-Qassam brigades that accused Israeli intelligence agency Mossad of murdering Tunisian aviation engineer Mohammed Zaoury. Zaoury, 49, was shot last Thursday evening in his car outside his home in Sfax on Tunisian eastern coast. Hamas military wing, Azadin al-Qassam brigade, said that the man had been a member of the Palestinian group for 10 years, responsible for supervising its Ababil drone program. Tunisian officials and judicial bodies investigating Zaoudi's death have not commented on the accusations. Why would the Tunisian government take these accusations by Azadin al-Qassam seriously, and why would the Israelis assassinate someone on Tunisian land?
As you know that this is a tradition of the Israeli Mossad to assassinate the scholars of the Arab world. As you know, this happened for the Egyptians in some decades, and at the same time, as you know, that Israel is still fighting any creations, any innovations in the Arab world, especially in nuclear powers, for example, or and so on. I think it is important for the Tunisians, as they have some informations or maybe a confidential information from the Palestinians. I think maybe the Mossad of Israel involved in such assassinations.
Assuming that the Tunisian intelligence services do find evidence that the Mossad is behind this assassination, this would cause a foreign policy crisis, I suppose, between Tunisia and Israel.
Of course.
What would the consequences be?
I think it is important for the Tunisians to raise the matter for the international community if they have a great evidence for the assassinations. This is on one hand. As you know that at the same time the United States is always protecting Israel in the United Nations and the Security Council. So I think it is important for Tunisia to cooperate with the Arab League and with the Arab countries at the same time to try to discover who is or was behind the assassinations first.
Okay, let's move to the next item that we have from the Daily Star of Lebanon that reads 3,000 level rebel Aleppo in new evacuations. The news item itself reads, an estimated 3,000 people were evacuated from the last rebel-held pocket of Syria's Aleppo earlier today after hours of delay. Another 25 vehicles arrived less than 2 hours later, bringing the total evacuated today to around 3,000. More than 30 buses packed with people had waited overnight in freezing temperature to leave Aleppo under a complex evacuation deal. Just 350 people were able to leave after Russia and Turkey urged the government to allow 5 buses to pass its final checkpoint, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said. How do you see the situation in Aleppo? I mean, up until yesterday night, they were talking about buses being burned, and they're not sure who did it, whether it's the government forces or the rebels. But at the end of the day, the fact is that the people are the ones who are suffering. How can the community or the international community deal with this humanitarian crisis?
As you know that the United States and Russia reached to a deal for going out of the rebels from Aleppo, and they reached to such a deal for sometimes, as you know, that they opened really a security ways for the rebels to go out. But after 2 days, I think the passing of the rebels and refugees, I mean, from Aleppo was halted, as they declared that they are in ceasefire and so on. And as you know that now they didn't reach to who tried to burn the buses and to set fire in the buses. I think still some militia and the groups is trying to struck the agreement between the United States and Russia, and also to make the confrontations on the ground between the Russian forces and the American coalitions with its allies in Syria.
Are there guarantees of the safety of those refugees? Because there were reports in the last week or so about men and children disappearing completely once they left Aleppo. Obviously, the government was accused of this act.
Yeah, of course. But as you know, that the Syrian regime and the Russian at the same times were serious in their initiatives to let the refugees to go out from Aleppo. This is, of course, because, as you know, that and sometimes they use the civilians as
human shields.
Human shields in their attacks against the regimes. I think the Russian and the Syrian is trying to clear the city from the civilians to face the rebels and also some extremists in the area.
Okay, let's move to the next item that we have from The Guardian that reads, Russian diplomats talk to NATO, Turkey and Iran. The news item itself reads, the Russian military says defense ministers of Russia, Turkey and Iran will meet in Moscow to discuss Syria. The meeting, due Tuesday, will coincide with the meeting of the three nations' foreign ministers, also in the Russian capital. The military said today that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu will host his Iranian counterpart and Turkey's Fikri Ishaq. It says that they will discuss ways to resolve the Syrian conflict and help implement UN Security Council resolutions on Syria. The only party here that is anti-government really is Turkey.
Yeah.
How will this negotiation process work? I mean, with the Iranians obviously supporting Bashar al-Assad and Moscow as well supporting Bashar al-Assad.
As you know that there is a great change in Turkey itself, especially after the change of the long standing between the two countries, I mean the United States and the Turkey.
Yes.
And as you know that the Russian seized all or a great part in Syria now. I mean, they are trying to cooperate with the Russian forces to face the United States. Especially, they suffered just now from the terrorist, not only the terrorist attacks, but also from the KGB of Turkey and their endeavor to get their entity in Turkey. I think now it is a great chance for the Turkey administration.
I apologize, sir. We're going to have to cut you off there because we have a press conference right now with one of the U.S. delegates for the Security Council, Samantha Power, who is going to go on air right now. Let's go take a look at the conference.
Of course, the Syrian government doesn't want more monitors. They don't want the crimes of their soldiers, their intelligence officials to be known. They have brought to this conflict a horrific sectarian agenda, and that nobody, if you're doing bad things, you don't want monitors around to watch you doing them. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that's his objective. I think the measure of this resolution is the Russian Federation serious about seeing it implemented? The text is plain. We were here for 3 hours yesterday negotiating every comma. It is very clear what is intended by the resolution, and that is not only to get UN monitors present to do direct observation, neutral monitoring, as the text says, but also to have a UN presence inside the eastern districts of Aleppo more broadly. And that is something that has never existed there because it's been a besieged area and the UN hasn't been able to get in. So I think that the letter of the resolution is clear, the spirit is equally clear, and the question for Russia really after a year and 3 or 4 months of being an active belligerent on the side of the Syrian regime is, are they serious about what they vote in the Security Council as a permanent member, and are they prepared to deliver a regime that would never have taken eastern Aleppo but for the offensive firepower that the Russian Federation brought to bear. And if I may just, as a factual matter also, in the resolution we call for the personnel that the UN already has in the area to be deployed and used urgently, but there is also a provision that calls on the Secretary General to increase the personnel on the ground as appropriate. So I think we'll be looking also very eagerly to see how Stephen O'Brien, Staffan de Mistura, and the Secretary General are thinking through what the life of this presence should look like. I think your point on Idlib is a version of the point that I was making at the outset, which is we can't lose sight of what's next, but not even just what's next, what's now. I mean, the people in so many parts of Syria, any territory that is opposition controlled, is being attacked, is being starved, medical provisions, medical supplies are being taken off any convoy that goes anywhere near it. And I think we have every reason to believe that the regime will continue to pursue a military solution despite fictional claims